All right, I'm gonna now go to the beginning of the book. I'm gonna start with the preface. So I've done the four categories of harm from compulsory rules, and now just kind of reading from the preface and riffing here. This book is inspired by a philosophy of parenting called taking children seriously, a non-coercive parenting movement that was co-founded by Sarah Fitzclarage and David Deutsch and was prominent in the United Kingdom in the 1990s. So it's a funny name, taking children seriously, and I think it's a terrific name. Apparently, this name was kind of hastily contrived in a moment of necessity, and then they weren't able to update it later on, and so they just kind of stuck with it. But I think it just sounds so different, right? Like gentle parenting, or I don't know what, non-coercive parenting, or free-range parenting. Taking children seriously doesn't even it's not even obvious that it's a parenting philosophy. um, and I like the active nature of it, taking them seriously, and it's also strange. It's kind of it's like what do you mean? um, what is taking children seriously? Why should children be taken seriously? um, why is it, why does that warrant creating an entire school of thought? um, And it also very, very well describes the philosophy in non philosophical terms. Um, Taking them seriously is really, I mean, it just changes the entire framework. Um, right? You can't, everything about conventional parenting ultimately boils down to dismissing the kids' reasons for why they're doing, or being uninterested in their reasons. Um, right? Taking something seriously means you are seriously interested in, sorry, taking a person seriously means that you're interested in their motivations, their understanding, their perspective, um, and dismissing somebody, writing them off, is being unserious toward them. Um, Not even being serious toward them; it's taking them themselves seriously. I don't know. It's just it's kind of an intuitive description. I love it. I think it is really dynamite title. Only that it's a little confusing that it's not obviously about parenting, but it's about children. So it's not just about parenting, it's about adult relationships with children. It's about society's relationship with children, certainly schools' relationship with children. And many people who are not parents, this is still extremely relevant because almost everybody interacts with children, and everybody was a child at one point, obviously. Many people will eventually be parents. Um, Many people's parenting role feels like it's done. Their children are grown, and so they're not having that same relationship. But a lot of those dynamics persist. Lots of uh, parents do not take their adult children seriously. They still treat them like kids. They still treat them like their reasons are unformed and dismissible. So I love the title of the philosophy. It was active in the 90s. It petered out, from what I can tell, in the late 90s, early 2000s, but it was quite big at its height. There was a print journal with, I think, 5,000 paid subscribers. That's a lot. And Sarah Fitzclarage was the main energy behind this. She did the traveling, she did the speaking to different groups. She was trying to basically persuade, um, well, she was trying to persuade people in the 90s and early 2000s in the United Kingdom to adopt this stance toward kids. Um, and David Deutsch was largely the kind of um, philosophical support during this time. In other words, he was the one that provided the philosophical groundwork. Sarah Fitzclarage had this intuitive sense that coercing kids was wrong, and she had some reasons behind it, but she was eventually introduced to David Deutsch, this physicist who also had these thoughts about children, and she met up with him and eventually collaborated with him, and he connected her to Popper and showed how the philosophy of knowledge, epistemology, undergirds this entire approach to children, and um, and then that's what we get into in the book later on. The second to last chapter is about Karl Popper's philosophy and how that connects to these ideas of freedom for kids and non-coercion, and it's all very exciting stuff. So David Deutsch, she's the other kind of co-founder. Apparently, there's a third person, and Sarah Fitzclarage is working on her own book, which would be obviously quite comprehensive on the history of taking children seriously, but also um, the other relevant philosophies and whatnot. But there were some. Apparently, there's a third person who eventually kind of left the fold, uh, and but these two are obviously the main two, and are still active on Twitter and elsewhere talking about these ideas. And I highly, highly recommend looking up, following Sarah Fitzclarage, following Taking Children Seriously on X. Sarah has given several lectures and talks on YouTube and various podcasts, and those are available on her website. If you look at Sarah Fitzclarage's um, website. There's also takingchildrenseriously.com, which is a revamped um, website for these ideas that republishes a lot of the old articles from the print journal and online journal from the 90s, as well as some newer current contributions and essays. I've got 2 articles up there, and but lots of other people have a lot of great stuff up there. And um, that's pretty much the main background. The other point of reference here is, I would say David Deutsch has 2 books: The Fabric of Reality and The Beginning of Infinity, and they're both monumental books. The Beginning of Infinity is more of the Fabric of Reality is more quantum physics and theoretical physics and physics of time, and a good bit of epistemology, but it's a pretty um, kind of physics philosophy heavy, dense book. The Beginning of Infinity is more wide ranging and includes topics about optimism and um, lots of stuff about culture, and it's just broader, and I would say less more accessible. And I can't recommend enough the book The Beginning of Infinity. Um, and then that's how I got into this stuff. I read The Beginning of Infinity back in 2011 when it was published, and I thought, wow, there's a lot here, and I got to come back to this book. Um, but I never came back to it. But some of the ideas lodged in my head. And then in 2018, um, for whatever reason, I came back to the book, and that's when it dawned on me and just how profound this book is. And then I read it and reread it and reread it. Pretty much had it on repeat, the Audible version, and I just went through this book so many times, each time being more and more impressed with just how much depth there is, how counterintuitive a lot of these ideas are, how profound they are, and absolutely life changing. And and that also coincided with the birth of my first child. And then I discovered taking children seriously, and then I started to think about, wow, am I actually going to apply these ideas to my kid? And as I'll describe in the book, obviously I did, and my wife and I have since been applying these ideas with all of our kids, and with each other, and with our parents and siblings. Um, and yeah, I'll get into all that stuff at some point. But um, yeah, this has been the most influential. I don't know. I've been an amateur philosophy reader since high school and certainly college, and I've kind of gone through a bunch of different philosophical schools of thought and have been, really into this and that, um, and these ideas of Karl Popper and David Deutsch have been easily the most influential, transformative set of ideas, and I can't recommend this enough. Sound kind of like I sound a little bit like a kind of cult of personality type person when I talk like this, but um, what can you do? When you discover a really powerful set of ideas, you don't just jettison them because they are narrowly subscribed. You jettison them when they don't add up or don't work or don't make sense. And so far, these ideas have been very durable. Um, all right. So, what is taking children seriously? And here I say the simplest way to describe taking children seriously is to describe what it is not. So that is a lame. I say simplest, easiest. It's kind of a cop out to describe something in terms of what it isn't, but it is pretty radical. And I wanted to what I'm trying in the book. I'm trying to break this down and make it available to a general reader who is not into philosophy, who's into parenting, but the philosophical rigor of parenting books is quite low, and I wanted to tap into that audience without scaring anybody off. And so I try to say what's kind of compelling about the book, but that's why I kind of took this cop out of describing what it's not. And that what it's not is the frame of almost every school of parenting is uh, the frame is, where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line is the organizing question of pretty much all schools of parenting. And what taking children seriously does is reject that as a framework. It rejects that as an organizing question. It's a bad question. Um, so the bad questions have um, contaminated, have kneecapped, have slowed down various fields of discovery of human inquiry many times. Many times, um, scientists or social scientists or philosophers or whomever will get hung up on bad questions, trying to answer badly formed questions. And the real breakthrough comes when people discover actually this is the better question to ask. And so, a simple example of this is, let's say, the theory of evolution. Before Darwin arrived, the question was, how do species, animals, organisms, how do they acquire um, the characteristics that they have? Um, Lamarck believed in evolution. Obviously, many people did not believe in evolution. They thought that animals and plants stayed in their current form, um, unchanged since creation. But lots of people believed in evolution back before Darwin and contemporaneously with Darwin as well, of course. But when they're trying to understand how evolution worked, their question was, how do organisms acquire the characteristics that they have? How do they change their collection of characteristics over time? How do they acquire them from the environment? And what Darwin discovered, and the theory of genetics basically cemented, was that organisms do not acquire characteristics from their environment. The giraffe does not acquire its long neck from the environment. Instead, the giraffe produces the long neck internally, and the environment selects. So giraffes produce necks that enable them to survive and reproduce, and the environment selects against necks that don't help giraffes survive and reproduce. So short necks get selected against, and long necks that can reach the tall trees, the leaves of tall trees. Those those characteristics are produced internally to the species itself. So that the giraffe has genes for growing a neck, and those genes make mistakes. There's variation, and some giraffes are born with longer necks, and some giraffes are born with shorter necks. And those giraffes that are born with longer necks because their genes mutated, those longer necked giraffes eventually go on to survive more successfully than the other giraffes in their population, and they themselves have little baby giraffes, and those baby giraffes have longer, those that do have longer necks, again, longer and longer. Anyway, the point is that the genes are producing the neck size. The environment, the trees are not producing the neck size. The environment itself, the habitat, is not producing the neck. Nothing is. stretching the giraffes' necks out. Everything comes internally, and so that's what Darwin discovered: is that a better question is not how do species acquire their characteristics from the environment. It's how do they produce their characteristics internally. That leads to the question: what is the mechanism that is carrying this information from parent to offspring? And that's how you discover DNA, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I won't belabor you with other examples. Well, I'll give you a Popper example. There's a lot of examples from Popper um, of reframing bad questions. A bad question is, how do we prove that something is true? How do we confirm that something is true? The answer is we don't, right? That's a bad process for understanding the world. A better process is to try to refute things. We really can't prove anything to be true, but we can refute things. We can show things to be false. And so, much better to try to falsify things than to confirm things, because, well, falsification is possible and confirmation is impossible. And by trying to falsify things, you will find theories that are very hard to falsify, and those are superior to theories that are easy to falsify. Um, and so there you go. I'll give you one more from Popper in the realm of politics, which is fun. It gives you an idea of just how broad Popper is. We commonly think of voting about selecting the best ruler, and that politics and elections are about choosing or answering the question, who should rule? And Popper showed in the book The Open Society and Its Enemies, he showed that that's actually the wrong question. That's not the most important thing. The will of the people, sure, it's important, but it's not the most important. The most important is um, eliminating bad rulers and bad policies nonviolently, easily. You want a system, not so much more than a system that reflects the will of the people or chooses the best ruler. More important than that is a system that makes it easy to eliminate a bad ruler and to eliminate a bad policy. So that's the question we should be focusing on. Fascinating. And so with children, the question we should not be focusing on, the red herring, is, where do parents draw the line? What things should be tolerated and not tolerated? What should be allowed and disallowed? That is how, pretty much the conversation about everything goes in the conventional parenting world. It's the parent's job to figure this out. And more lenient parents want to have more freedom, more autonomy, but they still need to draw the line somewhere. And where is that? Obviously, the strict parents are, authoritarian. Another way to put this is there's this idea of there's authoritarian parenting. There, on the other end of the spectrum, there is permissive parenting, and then in the middle is this authoritative parenting, which is a mixture of the two, right? It's more lenient than the authoritarian, where authoritarian is recognized to be bad. You don't want to be too strict and too overburdensome on your kids, but also you can't just let them run willy-nilly. You can't be totally permissive because kids need structure, et cetera, et cetera. And so in the middle, that's this reasonable approach where you have a small number of limits and boundaries, but they are firm. They are gentle but firm, right? That's what the American Psychological Association recommends. That's what the data recommends, this combination. And one funny thing to point out there is how irrational that is, right? Pure authoritarianism is irrational. It just says that might makes right. The parent's always right. The kid's always wrong. Kid does what the parent says. There's no discussion. There's no consideration of the kid's reasons, etc. Totally permissive parenting is also irrational. It's just saying do whatever you want. I'm not even engaging with my obligations. Also known as neglect. Terrible. Permissive parenting and neglect are awful and irrational. But what the American Psychological Association is trying to tell us is that the rational choice is a mixture of two irrational positions. A combination of two irrational positions magically produces a rational one. And that is bonkers. That's not true. So yeah, the typical school of thought is, where do we draw the line and how do we enforce? What consequences do we mete out? How do we administer consequences when kids transgress against the lines that we draw for them. And so taking children seriously simply ignores this. It steps not doesn't ignore this. It's doesn't approach problems in this way. When something is going wrong, the answer is not to say, okay, do I allow this or not? That is to immediately step off the train. Um, Taking children seriously steps away from all of this. It has no interest in what the best rules should be or how to enforce them because it has no interest in rules. Again, compulsory rules. When most people hear this, their first reaction is to assume taking children seriously is a fancy version of complete permissiveness, a well known and ancient parenting style, otherwise known as neglect. And so, yes, um, it's easy to say that I'm not endorsing neglect here, but nonetheless, I'll say it. Uh, it's not about. Um, Sorry, one second. It's not about neglect or not advocating neglect. Um, in fact, quite the opposite. Another big criticism is that this form of parenting is too intense, too involved, and too time consuming and not practical for regular people, which I also disagree with. So instead of focusing on rules, right, instead of focusing on where do we draw the line, and I just want to say something else about drawing the line. I know of some gentle parenting folks, some people who are interested in non-coercive parenting. Almost everybody I talk to says that, oh, I agree with a lot of what you say, but you know there are some limits, and a lot of people are pro freedom for their kids. They are pro autonomy, but they still um, will enumerate, we need to enforce rules in this situation, and this situation. They often don't add up, don't align. It's quite interesting. Um, people's areas that they consider to be no go areas where rules are simply are a necessity. Um, some are around screens, some are around food, some are around sleep. Right? They people rarely have the same uh, set of kind of red zones, even the pro freedom, pro autonomy people. Okay. So, what is taking children seriously if it's not enforcing rules and it's not neglect? And what it is it's helping a child until they understand the world well enough that they can support themselves. Um, it's about supporting understanding, and for a little kid, obviously they don't understand. That's the entire game. And so, how can you basically help them get what they want and also support their understanding without putting them in danger, without injuring them in some way? Um, and so it's yeah, I should read. I'm getting a little stumbled. Parenting is the process of supporting a child until they understand the world well enough that they can support themselves. What is the best way to foster understanding? To provide freedom and security for a person's creativity to discover how the world works. Rules limit freedom, and hence they limit understanding, and therefore they impair the parenting project. So that's the trouble, is that rules will narrow a kid's range of freedom, narrow their ability to discover, and will ultimately uh, impair their growing understanding. Um, I should say a little bit more about it. Um, every time, every time there's an issue with parenting, right? When the kid is in agreement with what the parent wants them to do, there's no issue. The issue comes up when there's a disagreement, obviously, when there's a conflict, and there are different approaches to conflict. The conflict is that the kid wants thing A and the parent wants thing B. Um, Obviously, that could be the parent wants the kid to brush their teeth and the kid doesn't. The parent wants them to eat their vegetables and the kid doesn't. The kid wants to eat ice cream and the parent doesn't want them to. Right? That's pretty much how you could kind of summarize, all parenting is dealing with these conflicts. And if every time the conflict arises, instead of saying, do I allow this or not? Do I force my wishes on the kid or not? Instead, there's always a third option. And the third option is, can we think of some way where I get what I want and the kid gets what they want? Um, and also, I'm not worried about them getting hurt or whatever harmful negative consequence there is. Um, and yeah, all right. Um, so still the preface, so not getting deep into the philosophy here. This book is inspired by the themes in The Sovereign Individual by James Dale Davidson and William Rees-Mogg. So this is a great book, The Sovereign Individual. It's from the 90s. It was published as the internet was taking off, and it kind of painted this picture of a tech-enabled future where individuals could be sovereign, could rely less and less on the state, and could have their own kind of peer-to-peer interactions with each other via the internet, not through an intermediary that involves the state, that liberates them from surveillance and all the other things that libertarians largely complain about. Um, Privacy advocates, etc., are also envisaged, foretold, foresaw. Talked about digital currency. It anticipated Bitcoin. Um, so this is a famous book, and yes, I cribbed the title. It was actually my wife's idea for the title of this book, and she'd never read The Sovereign Individual, and yeah. So on one hand, I feel a little bad that we kind of are riding off of this famous book. But on the other hand, I truly believe that the ideas in this book mesh with those ideas, that it is following in that same spirit. And children are often left out of the libertarian. Shouldn't say they're often left out. I think that libertarianism is not extended to children. Libertarianism is, I mean, I'm a libertarian, and libertarians have a lot to say about many topics in life, including children and parenting. They're, I would say, certainly better than most parents in terms of philosophically, but there is farther to go. And so that's what I'm hoping I've done here, is really extend the libertarian argument um, through to babies. Yeah, what I say here is, the sovereign individual outlines this idea of self sovereignty that requires huge society wide innovations. The self sovereignty we might unlock for children can take root in any home, anywhere, by anyone of any financial status. So that's really cool. The sovereign individual, those changes, the ideas in that book require these sweeping technological and social changes. Here, we're talking about changes that can be enacted within one's own home tomorrow. The sovereign child doesn't have to wait for anything except a curious parent. All right, then I describe the different chapters in the book, which I will skip for now. And then I have this disclaimer, which was a lot of fun. I guess I'll talk about the chapters in the book. So the first three chapters are kind of the most provocative and hands-on. Chapter 1 is about food, chapter 2 is about sleep, and chapter 3 is about screens. And I wanted to hit the ground running with this book and show people the ideas in action, and just provide some simple reasons for why I think the thoughts that I think about these areas. But I wanted to start with the most fraught areas, and I use examples from my kids, not to prove the case, but to simply show that I've actually tested these ideas out in the real world, and I mean what I say. I'm not using the anecdotes to prove anything, but just to share that I'm not a completely idealistic lunatic. Um, Chapter 4 is about we already talked about on this channel, the problems with enforcing rules themselves. Chapter 5, I talk about the process of taking children seriously itself. in more detail. And then chapter 6, I go through a bunch of counter arguments. Chapter 7, I do a bunch of simple applications in the rest of life. So not just foods, sleep, and screens, but other things like cars and visiting family and stuff like that. Um, Chapter 8 is about siblings, and that's my favorite chapter. It was my favorite chapter to write. A lot of things, I discovered a lot of things thinking about siblings, and I think siblings are actually the hardest part of parenting. It's much easier um, to manage your relationship with your child one on one because you have a bunch of knowledge and they don't, and you know how the world works, and so it's much easier to help them out. But when a child is relating with another child and neither of them know how the world works, it's very easy for them to start fighting, and well, it's very easy for them to start fighting, and I hate that. Chapter 9 gives some ideas for how to shift from a rules-based family and rules-based parenting to rules-free. And then chapter 10 is when I dive deep into the philosophy. And so philosophy heads are going to, I recommend that if you really like philosophy, start with chapter 10. A lot of people have said that should have been the first chapter. And that really helps frame the rest of the conversation. And then chapter 11 is this expansive view of the future, of the distant past and the deep future. And that was very fun. And then that really shows you the kind of the power of these ideas and their breadth. Um, all right, and then I close the preface with this disclaimer that I'm not trying to. Well, it's a large disclaimer about for my own parents. My own parents are very proud of their parenting. They took parenting very seriously. They would, part of my interest in this topic comes from growing up and my parents constantly talking about their parenting and what their hopes are and what they're trying to avoid and the mistakes that their parents made that they were trying to avoid. And obviously what I'm saying is a critique of what they did, and I feel bad. I don't want to make them feel bad about their parenting, um, but at the same time my parents would want me to improve on their parenting. And just as they improved on their parents, they would want me to improve on what they did. And ultimately that's what we're all here for. We're here for moving human uh, progressing human progress. And I'm not trying to give anybody a hard time with the way that they take care of their kids. Almost everybody loves their kids and tries the hardest that they can. And I am simply suggesting, um, describing what I think would be a better way of doing things. Um, and so I go at some length. In the book, I don't qualify a lot of the statements. I don't spend time, um, with a preamble when I make the arguments. I simply make the arguments because, in the interest of clarity, you don't want a lot of preamble and whatnot. So this disclaimer is essentially what I'm considering to be the preamble. Everything I say in this book is meant not to be an attack on anybody. It's meant to say, I understand that things are challenging. I understand that this won't always work. I understand that um, you love your kids and you want what's best for them. And that being said, here's what I think about screens and food and sleep and all the rest of it. So I think that's all I wanted to say in the preface. Oh, yeah, any indication of shaming that readers pick up is unintentional. And when I talk about this stuff, I often get snarky and I like to make fun of authoritarians. There's nothing more fun than that. But I don't mean it personally. A lot of times it just makes the content more engaging if it's a little snarky or a little funny or a little sarcastic, but try to keep that to a minimum. And um, and the last bit is that I am a medical doctor, a physician, a practicing physician, but this is not medical advice. I left my name, my title of MD off the cover. People gave me a hard time about that, but that's an argument from authority, and this is the ultimate argument from somewhere else. And so none of this is medical advice. None of this is presented as this is the answer. These are all ultimately still guesses. These are my guesses. We're largely informed by taking children seriously, the guesses of Fitzclarence and Deutsch and others. Um, and I don't always, I'm not trying to speak for them. I'm just articulating these ideas as they have, as I formulated them in my mind. So I don't mean to be taking credit from the taking children seriously folks. I don't mean to be representing them. Um, and any errors are my own. All right, that's enough for the preface. We'll get into food next, the most radical chapter of the book. All right, thanks very much.